Okay, you lovely lot. So this time we're going to be going through floats, and in particular, what float to use in what depth. You know, loads of different ones out there. You know, we get asked this question a lot. What size float should you use in like 3 foot of water, for example? Well, I'm going to be going through all of them with you. Now, I'm not going to make it complicated for you folks, but sometimes, or well, you'll hear us say to fish like a heavy float in shallow water. I'll cover that later on, but I'm going to go through the basic floats first that I'd use in sort of open water. Them little beauties are for later on. So first things first, I'm going to say as a guide, for up to sort of 2.5 foot, you want to be going for a 410s float. Now 410s roughly equates to like a 0.1 of a gram. Again, that's the other confusing bit in it sometimes, and obviously you see the 0.1, 0.2 and then the 412, 414s and things like that. Basically it's easy to understand. As soon as you get used to like what shots the float takes, you'll get used to it, no problem at all. So first things first, 410s floats in up to sort of 2.5 foot of water. The trouble you'll have going forward for the deeper water is the lighter the float, obviously the more unstable it is in that deeper water. So that's why you need to choose a heavier float. But that one for me is perfect up to 2.5 foot, roughly about a 0.1. So that's what we're starting off on. When you get to depths 2.5, I'm going to say to about 4 foot. So we're going roughly sort of 2.5 foot increments here, folks, yeah, and the different sizes of the floats. So when you get 2.5 to 4 foot, that's when I'd get my 412s out, cheeky, which is roughly equivalent to a 0.2 up to a 0.3 of a gram float. Yeah, this is all for stability in the depth of water, just as a rough guide for you. Really simple to understand. That's the one. And then when you get to, I'm going to say from 4 foot to sort of 5.5, maybe 6 foot. I mean, the other thing you've got to consider, folks, is obviously conditions on the day. If you look at the conditions behind me today, obviously completely flat calm, no wind, no undertow, things like that. That's when obviously floats like this would come into play. You've got to consider the fact that obviously if it's windy with undertow, then you might want to go that little bit heavier just for the stability of the rigs. But as a general rule, which is what I'm putting across to you today, this is what I'll be using. So when we get to, yeah, sort of like 4 to 4.5 foot, that's when I come on to a 414s. Dead simple. Now when we're going deeper, sort of, what we're saying, 5.5 to 7, even 8 foot. Like in the winter time when it's flat calm and bites at a premium, I'd use this quite happily in sort of 8 foot of water. But as a rule, 5.5 to 7 foot of water, that's when the 416s come into play. Now, yeah, the 414, sorry I didn't say, was roughly about a 0.4 of a gram, and the 416s is about a 0.5 to a 0.6 of a gram. Now, the other thing you've got to consider, obviously, if you're fishing in deeper water, all you've got to do is just increase the size of your float. So from fishing in sort of 7 to maybe 9 foot of water, that's when you go into a 418s float. 9 foot plus, you know, like a gram float. Just keep increasing the size, things like that. Now, here's where it gets confusing. Obviously, we talk a lot about fishing in the mudline and in the margins with heavy floats. Now, what I wouldn't want to do is obviously, because I've said before at the start, I want to fish like that 410s float in up to sort of 2.5 foot of water. So you're thinking, well, why ain't you fishing? Because these floats here, folks, this is what I'd be fishing in 2.5 foot and less. You're thinking, well, you've just said to use a 410s float in that water. Right, so here's where it gets tricky. The reason you use a float like that in shallow water is you're not fishing it in the mudline. Now, the reason you're using floats like this in the mudline, the margins, is because of the body on these floats. Much stable. Much more stable than what that float is. If I was to fish that float in the shallow water, there's not enough weight down the line to physically keep my bait on the bottom. So you imagine a great big wobbly F1 or carp comes in, wafts its fin, this float's going to be moving all over the place. These floats are fishing in sort of like open water, away from sort of the mudline or the margins, yeah? Whereas these, so what's this one here? Right, so we'll go through this one first. 414s, I've fished that anything from, well, blooming heck, 6 inches up to sort of like 2 foot. Now the beauty of them compared to them other floats is it's all to do with this rugby ball shaped body, or diamond, if you whatever shaped body, but it's got to be bulbous to really sort of keep your rig nice and stable. Shot, you know, nice bulk of shot with a little babby hook length on. That float is lovely and stable in up to sort of 2 foot of water. Now when I'm going sort of like 2 to 2.5 foot of water, that's when my 4/16 comes into play. So roughly 0.4 of a gram is a 4/14s, 0.5 of a gram is like a 4/16. Traditionally, I wouldn't be using a float like this in any deeper than 2.5 foot of water. Now the reason for that is it's just too top heavy and not stable enough. Yeah, you'll see obviously with a longer float or a bigger float of the same shotting capacity, because the stem's a lot longer, it's much more stable. Whereas obviously float like this, it's only designed for, I'm going to say 2.5 foot and less, because it just gets too top heavy and starts wobbling around all over the place. A little bit confusing, folks, but hopefully I've simplified everything for you. Give it a go, especially this time of year. Get on them little bad boys in your 2.5 foot and less, and you will have the time of your life. Get on it, folks.
Right, you lads, very sorry to interrupt your video watching.
How dare you?
Quickly, if you haven't already noticed, we have managed to write a book, haven't we?
Yes, we have,
Which
Jamie.
is full of all our very bestest methods and features or whatever else we do on this wonderful subject of fishing. So if you haven't had a look already, go and have a look at winningways.shop and buy one for yourself.